Thunder rumbled, awakening Sarah. The woman opened her eyes to the sound of rain tapping on the window pane. A May thunderstorm, she mused. The last month of spring had been hot and dry, making the rain a welcome change. She opened the curtains to admire the rain cleansing the young leaves of dust. Looking down, she noticed a large black car in the deserted street. Beside it stood 3 men, 2 clad in black and the third, near the car, in jeans and a white sweater. He seemed to be searching for someone among the apartment windows. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Sarah hurried into the hallway, but Shaunette overtook her. The woman was already up and preparing breakfast, so she reached the door first. "Shaunette," said the neighbour's boy, Tommy, "they've come for your granny. They have a nice car, and they look serious. They gave me $20. "Hold on, who's come?" Shaunette interrupted. "I don't know. They only asked me to call Sarah Reed," answered the boy. Sarah looked at Tommy in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone for a long time, and was certain that no one was looking for her. Shaunette turned to the elderly woman and asked, "Do you understand what's happening?" "Absolutely no, Shaunette," Sarah replied, "but there is indeed a car parked there, and there are strangers near it." "So stay here, and I'll go and see what's going on," Shaunette said resolutely, putting on her shoes and throwing a light sweater over her dress. She left the apartment, closed the door behind her, and headed for the stairs with Tommy following her. Sarah Reed was born in a small mountain town into an ordinary family, where most of the men worked at the metallurgical plant, the town's only large enterprise. Sarah's father, Jacob, was also a metallurgist. He had married Rebecca, Sarah's mother, immediately after returning from military service. They had loved each other since school and dreamed of a large, happy family. However, after Sarah's birth, Rebecca was unable to get pregnant again, and Jacob desired a son, or better yet, several sons. His dissatisfaction with his wife and resentment over her inability to provide heirs often led to arguments. "You're nothing. Why do I need a woman as useless as you?" When Jacob caused such a scene, the woman attempted to pacify him, but most often she used to hide in her daughter's room. Sarah did not do well at school. She got from C's to B's. However, Rebecca always encouraged her daughter to pursue further education or a vocational course. She always emphasized the importance of having a profession in today's world. "Without a profession, you can't survive," her mother would say. "You could become a hairdresser, a cook, even a seamstress, but you must be capable of working." Rebecca held high hopes that Sarah would be her pillar of support in her old age, as there was no one else she could rely on. But at the age of 16, Sarah became pregnant. For several months she managed to hide her sin, but when her belly became noticeably rounded, she had to confess to her mother, and the latter, shaking with fear, told her husband. Jacob's shouting and swearing that night was heard throughout the street. He shouted so loud that the walls shook, and the dishes rattled in the cupboard. "You little brat! I'm going to shake it out of your belly and the nonsense out of your head." He was rushing around the house, swinging at his daughter, throwing things around in anger. "You've disgraced us. People will say about us that Jacob's daughter is a doormat." "Jacob, calm down. Our daughter shouldn't be nervous now." Rebecca tried to calm her husband. She shouldn't be nervous, but she can flirt with men," yelled her father, not relenting. "Stand back, mother. I'm going to teach her a lesson." "Don't, Jacob. Don't touch our daughter. I'll take her to the doctor tomorrow and sort everything out." Rebecca went to the cupboard, where she had a bottle of whiskey, hidden behind other dishes. She took out a shot glass, slammed it on the table and poured. "Drink up, Jacob. Drink up and calm down." The man quickly downed his drink, and Rebecca refilled his glass. She knew her husband would relax after a few drinks, and perhaps he wouldn't hit Sarah. She didn't want to bring her pregnant daughter with bruises to the doctor's office. Walking in silence from the women's clinic the next day, Sarah and Rebecca wondered what the future held. The pregnancy was too advanced, and there was nothing to be done about it. Instead, the doctor instructed them to complete a medical examination and get tested. When questioned about the baby's father, Sarah claimed there wasn't one. "I should report this to the police and Child Protective Services," the doctor said sternly. "You must tell me who did this to you." "He was just passing through town. He's gone now and I don't know where he is." "Do you at least know his name or where he's from?" When Sarah remained silent, the doctor sighed. Jacob and Rebecca were worried about their daughter, and she seemed to be obsessed with her baby. She knitted sweaters and booties from yarn, sewed bonnets, decorated the room. Her only focus was on the baby she was expecting. Sarah's baby decided to come much earlier than expected. She gave birth to a boy in the 8th month. From the onset of labour until the baby was born, Sarah's parents were at the hospital, and they didn't leave. "As long as everything is fine," Rebecca prayed. "Stop whining," Jacob rudely interrupted. "Rejoice at least in the fact that she will not be an eyesore with her belly. We'll not have a reason for neighbours to discuss our daughter, to embarrass us in front of everyone." When the doctor came out to speak to the parents, they both approached her eagerly. "Well, how's our daughter, doctor?" asked the worried Rebecca. "Your daughter gave birth," said the doctor, but before she could finish, Jacob took her by the elbow and led her aside. "I need to talk to you urgently," he insisted, his determined expression preventing the doctor from arguing. "Well, come into my office," she responded. Rebecca moved to join them, only to be stopped by her husband. "Wait here," I said. "I'll be back soon." Bewildered, Rebecca remained in the waiting room, frustrated with her husband's refusal to let her speak with the doctor. When her husband finally appeared in the doorway, Rebecca jumped from her seat. "What did the doctor say, Jacob? What's wrong?" she asked. "A sick, premature child was born," he responded. "What can I say? The doctor said he might not make it." "What do you mean, not make it?" "He might die," he answered bluntly. "Oh, God, how can it be?" wailed Rebecca. "Quiet. Let's go home. You're not needed here anymore. Sarah's asleep. She's been sedated," he responded. At home, Jacob sat in the kitchen with a bottle of whiskey. He barely spoke to his wife, only drinking all the time. The next day, after work, Sarah's parents hurried to the maternity hospital. Jacob seated Rebecca on a chair in the emergency room, saying, "Sit here. I'll find out everything myself." He then headed down the corridor to the doctor's office. His wife waited for him for about half an hour. Jacob returned furious and slammed his fist on the wall. "The baby died," he said. "What?" Rebecca did not understand. "Are you a fool? The baby was premature and sick. It died. That's all." "Wait. Jacob, where's the death certificate? Will they give it to us?" Rebecca suddenly asked. "They'll give it to us when we come to pick up our daughter. Let's go." The man headed for the exit, and Rebecca hurried after him. At home, the woman broke down in tears. She was heartbroken for the baby, her daughter, and the lost opportunity to be a grandmother. "We must ensure the baby receives a proper burial," thought Rebecca. She also couldn't help but worry about her daughter, who probably had already heard the tragic news. The tears just kept flowing. 2 days later, they picked Sarah up from the maternity hospital. She looked pale, thin, and drained. Sarah didn't cry, but silently stood with her parents, waiting for her belongings to be brought out. "Jacob, go get the certificate," Rebecca asked her husband, "and find out when they give us him for burial." "I know what to do. I'm going now," Jacob responded abruptly. He left, and upon his return said, "Let's leave quickly." "What happened? And where's the certificate? And what about the body?" the woman persisted. "I got so mad at them. They don't want to give the body, saying it's not allowed," Jacob exclaimed as he left the hospital, striding down the sidewalk, while Sarah and Rebecca tried to catch up with him. "Why?" "How should I know? They have rules. They gave the death certificate to me, but I got so furious that I tore it up and threw it in their face." "Oh, Jacob, why are you so rude? You should have asked calmly." "How can you speak to them calmly? They ruined the kid, my grandson. They even said it was our own fault for raising our daughter poorly. I just couldn't control myself." At home, Sarah locked herself in her room and didn't come out, no matter how much her mother pleaded. The cry of the baby she had given birth to resonated in her mind. She heard it clearly, as if he were lying next to her and crying. Sarah had barely finished school. Her classmates treated her with mocking and avoided socializing with her. Of course, it was logical for them. They looked forward to their futures, confident that everything was going according to plan. They expected to get an education, find jobs and build beautiful families. However, Sarah's life was different. She already had a relationship with a man who didn't love her at all. Furthermore, she experienced pregnancy but never became a mother. She was already not very sociable, and this painful experience made her further withdraw into herself, becoming like a gloomy shadow. Every time she returned from school, she could feel the neighbours' eyes on her. Of course, not all of them looked at her with contempt. Some women with baby strollers lowered and averted their eyes upon seeing her. They were afraid to imagine what the young woman who had lost her child was feeling. They feared to even momentarily put themselves in her shoes, as they had healthy babies in their strollers. 2 years had passed. Sarah's mother hoped that the wound in her daughter's soul would gradually heal, and she would return to her old self. But it seemed as if something had irrevocably broken inside her. After graduation, the girl landed a job in a supermarket, showing no interest in further education. Her father now drank every evening. After returning home from work, he would sit at the kitchen table, demanding a bottle and a glass. Rebecca found herself automatically buying alcohol after work to avoid his wrath if there was nothing to drink at home. "Jacob, what are you doing to yourself?" Rebecca would ask. "Why are you ruining your health?" "Shut up, you fool," Jacob would rudely snap back. "It numbs my sin. Pour!" To avoid a scene, the wife would dutifully pour the bitter drink into a glass. 2 more years passed, and this Saturday evening mirrored countless others. Jacob relaxed in the kitchen with a beer, while Rebecca cooked something by the stove. Their daughter, Sarah, would soon be back from work and would need to be fed. "Jacob, maybe it's time to stop drinking. Perhaps you could watch some TV at least," suggested Rebecca. "Leave me alone. What's there to watch? Soap operas? Nonsense. Tell me, is our daughter going to mourn the baby forever? She should be getting married by now. How long has she been a burden to us?" "She's not a burden to you. She earns her own money," Rebecca retorted. "I know, but a woman needs a man, or she'll lose herself completely," he insisted. "Calm down. She's been through so much. God forbid, don't you feel sorry for her?" The woman put the lid on the pot and turned off the stove. "What's there to feel sorry for? All women are the same." Jacob waved away. The sound of the door opening echoed from the hallway. Moments later, Sarah emerged in the kitchen with a guy standing next to her, who looked about 10 years older. "Dad, Mum, meet Paul. We're planning to live together," Sarah announced, leaving her parents gobsmacked. "Hello," the guy greeted. Jacob and Rebecca were taken aback, their surprised gazes shifting between Sarah and Paul. They hadn't anticipated such a move from their daughter. Rebecca had assumed Sarah wasn't seeing anyone and certainly wasn't planning to marry. When did all this happen? "Well, great." Jacob extended his hand to the guy. "Come in, sit at the table. Rebecca, set the dinner and get another glass for our guest. Let's talk." The family settled down for dinner. Rebecca placed the plates on the table, served the pasta and meatballs, and took a seat herself. Sarah ate in silence, her eyes downcast. She appeared indifferent to everything happening around her. "Well, let's toast to get acquainted." Father raised his glass and Paul joined him, downing his own in one gulp. "How long have you two been dating?" "A week now, Dad," Sarah replied, toying with her food. Not too long, I must admit." Jacob scratched the back of his head and refilled the glasses. "And you both have already decided to get married?" "No, we won't have a wedding," the daughter replied. "Why not?" "We decided there's no point in spending money at a useless wedding," Paul interjected. "There is no point in gathering a crowd of unnecessary people." "And you think it's acceptable to get married together without a proper wedding, do you?" Jacob retorted, growing angry. "Absolutely," Paul responded, taking another drink. "Look, Rebecca, what they're doing." The indignant father, who was quite tipsy, continued, "I'll get beaten up at the factory for marrying off my daughter and not inviting my team." "Mr. Reed, you can invite your colleagues and celebrate our future happy life," the young man replied. "Have a drink and a snack with them. What do we care? Who are they to us?" Jacob carefully examined his future son-in-law, then slammed his fist on the table so hard that the plates bounced, and Paul's empty glass tipped over, rolled and fell to the floor. "I decide what is important and what is not," the father shouted. "Calm down, Jacob," Rebecca soothed her husband, realizing that a serious scandal or even a fight could erupt from this spark of anger. Jacob took another drink, calmed down slightly, and continued the conversation. "And where do you two plan to live?" "Dad, Paul has his own one-bedroom apartment. It will be sufficient for us," Sarah responded, her demeanour emotionless. She remained unaffected by her father's disapproval and calmly poured tea for the men. "You'd better drink your tea, or you'll both end up completely drunk." "So, there's dwelling. Good," the man approved. "Where do you work? Not at a plant?" "No, sorry, that sort of life isn't for me," Paul replied. "I have a small clothing shop in the market. I buy cheap in the capital and sell at a higher price here." "So, you're a bargainer," Jacob interrupted. "Why should I be a bargainer?" Paul objected. "I'm an entrepreneur." "All the same," Jacob dismissed with a wave of his hand. He fell silent for a moment, then asked in a more peaceful tone, "Are you in love, or what?" "Jacob, love isn't the main thing these days," Paul responded. "What's more important is trust, support, and financial stability between a husband and wife. In the past, girls were married off without love, and they managed to form strong, prosperous families." "Don't say nonsense," Jacob countered, pointing his index finger. "In the old days, parents chose the grooms, but you've appeared from nowhere. We know nothing about you, yet you expect us to hand over our daughter." Paul leaned back in his chair and smiled wryly. "Ask away. I'll answer all your questions." Outside it was already dark. Sarah leaned against the wall, watching her father and Paul discuss her future while they continued to drink. Eventually, the father said in a slurred voice, "Do what you want. Live your life, Paul. I can see you think intelligently, like a businessman." A month later, Sarah and Paul married, and Jacob declared to his wife, "Now, no one can dare to call my daughter a promiscuous girl. She's a married woman now. That's how it is." The capital greeted the new day. Highways, streets and avenues gradually bustled with life as cars filled the roads and people hurriedly went about their day. During the night, a warm summer rain had fallen, cooling the asphalt that had been heated by the intense summer sun. Hannah emerged from her bedroom and descended the stairs. The housekeeper, Erin, greeted her. "Good morning. Shall I make you some coffee?" "Don't worry, Erin, I'll do it myself. Is Arthur still at home?" Hannah asked. "Yes, he's in the dining room having breakfast," Erin replied. "Good," Hannah responded. proceeding to the dining room where her husband was finishing his cheesecake. Erin had been working for the Lewises for 5 years. Her calm demeanour, cleanliness and frugality had made her indispensable to the family. She not only helped maintain the large house and cooked excellently, but she was also able to keep her mouth shut to make sure that what was going on in the house did not go beyond the high brick fence. "Good morning, dear." Hannah pecked her husband on the cheek. "Are you leaving already?"
"Yes, darling, there's a lot to do today," Arthur replied, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I've scheduled a meeting for this morning."
"Will you be back late, as always?" Hannah asked with frustration.
"I'll try not to be late."
The man left the table, hugged his wife, kissed her and headed for the exit.
"Bye. Don't miss me too much."
Hannah and Arthur had been in love since their student days. After graduation, they married. With the help of Arthur's parents, his career quickly flourished. He swiftly assumed his father's position as the general director of a metal processing enterprise. Essentially, he inherited the role when his father chose to retire and enjoy a quiet life in a country house by the sea. Hannah, not needing to work, dedicated her time to her hobby, pottery. A small house was built in their garden, serving as her workshop, where she handcrafted impressive items such as cups, jugs, vases and plates. The couple lived comfortably, able to afford any luxury, but there was something they couldn't buy. For 10 years they had been trying to have a child, but all attempts were unsuccessful. This inability to conceive affected Hannah the most. Meanwhile, Arthur got a phone call from his business acquaintance from the distant mountain town.
"Hi, Arthur, how are you?"
"Andrew, hello."
Arthur was delighted by the call from his friend and partner, but he immediately felt a chill run down his back.
"Everything's fine. Why are you calling? Is there a problem at the plant?"
No, don't worry," the voice on the other end of the line reassured him.
"I have some news for you. I got a reply from the orphanage you sent the sponsorship. The director sent me the documents for one boy who she thinks might be the best fit for you. Blue-eyed, light-haired. His health isn't the best, but nothing serious. He's very bright for his age."
"And how old is the boy?" Arthur asked, his heart starting to race.
"He's 2 years old and was left at the maternity hospital right after birth. The mother has waived her rights, so there won't be any issues. There's a couple considering him for adoption, but the principal believes this family wouldn't be good for the boy, and if she were to choose anyone, it would be you and Hannah. Andrew, tell the principal to hold off on anything. I'll call you a little later." "Okay, I'll wait for your call."
Arthur ended the call and started to ponder. His family had considered adoption, but Hannah wanted an infant, not a 2-year-old with a potentially established character. Regardless, the man stored all the documents in the safe and stepped into the reception area.
"I won't be in today. Cancel all my appointments."
When Arthur arrived home, Hannah met him outside. He seldom left work in the middle of the day. She sensed that something had occurred. "Arthur, is there trouble at work?" She embraced her husband. "Why did you come home so suddenly?"
"Actually, I have urgent news to discuss," he replied. "Let's go inside."
Arthur led his wife to the door, arm in arm. They settled in the living room. Erin served tea and placed it on the table in front of them. Hannah watched Arthur intently, awaiting the news.
"Tell me, have you not yet abandoned the thought of adopting a child?" he asked quietly, studying his wife attentively.
"Arthur, did you come home in the middle of the workday to ask me that?" Hannah's eyes showed confusion and surprise. "We could have discussed this tonight."
"No, we couldn't," Andrew called. "There's a boy in the orphanage. He says the boy is intelligent and handsome."
"My God, Arthur, there's always a smart and handsome boy in every orphanage," Hannah exclaimed.
"You know, when Andrew said the orphanage director wanted to meet us, my heart started to race. I got excited and wanted to talk to you. There's a family in town that wants to adopt him. It's in the country, where he won't have a good education or prospects. He'll grow up in a working-class family. What can they provide for him?"
"But we wanted a baby."
"Hannah, a 2-year-old is still very young. We can raise him as our own, and he'll never know he was adopted."
The woman stood up and walked to the window, her gaze falling on the garden lawn, where she imagined her and Arthur's son could play. "When do we have to go?" she asked without turning around.
"As soon as possible," her husband replied. "I'll call the airport and book the tickets."
By morning, they were on their way to meet the boy who might become their son. 5 hours later, a nervous Hannah and Arthur were sitting in the office of the director of the orphanage. "Don't worry so much, Mrs. Lewis. The boy will be brought in soon. Would you like some tea or coffee in the meantime?" The guests from the capital refused, eager to meet the child. "Then let me tell you a little about Taylor," the principal began, pulling out the child's personal file from the cupboard. His 16-year-old mother signed a refusal right after his birth. The child was born prematurely. "I can never understand how one can abandon their own child, whom they've carried under their heart for so long," Hannah said sadly. "Situations are different, Mrs. Lewis," the principal replied. "Not everyone is ready for motherhood. In such cases, it's better for strangers to raise them than a grief-stricken mother." At this moment the teacher entered the office, leading a boy by the hand. He was pulling a toy car on a string behind him. The Lewises looked attentively at the little boy. Blonde-haired, with beautiful blue eyes, Taylor seemed like he had stepped straight out of a children's book. "Hello, what's your name?" Hannah asked, squatting down next to him. "Taylor," the little boy responded, unafraid of the unfamiliar lady. "I am Hannah Lewis, and this is my husband Arthur," she introduced, prompting the boy to shift his gaze toward the man. "And how old are you, Taylor?" Hannah asked. Taylor stretched his hand forward, spread out 2 fingers, and announced loudly, 2. The adults present laughed at the sight of the confident child proudly declaring his age. Taylor then stepped forward and offered his toy car to Hannah. "Do you like playing with cars?" she asked. "Yes," Taylor responded enthusiastically. "And would you like to go to a place where there are many, many cars, and they will all be yours?" Taylor nodded his head, appearing direct and confident, despite the adults watching him closely. Hannah found herself thinking that if she had met him under different circumstances, she wouldn't have guessed that his mother had abandoned him, and he had been raised in an orphanage. As Taylor was led away, Arthur and Hannah exchanged glances. Their opinions had coincided throughout their 10-year marriage, and they did so again now. Arthur's eyes seemed to say, "This is our boy," while Hannah's eyes responded, "We will love him more than life." Upon returning home, they began to prepare for adoption. Arthur instructed his lawyer to gather and process all the necessary documents. Meanwhile, Hannah was bursting with anticipation at the thought of finally having a son. "Erin," she instructed, "clean the bedroom next to ours today. Have the guard remove all the furniture. We'll buy everything new, clean, and wash everything. We need to finish the renovations quickly. That will be Taylor's room." "Okay, Mrs. Lewis, I'll take care of everything," Erin responded. The very next day, a team of repairmen was at work in the nursery, and Hannah was in the living room with one of the best interior designers in the capital. The young man, sporting a stylish jacket and a pigtail, was presenting potential projects. Hannah had contacted him the previous day, asking for a rapid design project to decorate the nursery. After working through the night, he now proudly, albeit nervously, presented his proposals. "I like this one," Hannah said, pointing to a design of a room awash with snowy blue. "Great choice. Lots of light, space and air. However, all the furniture here is custom-made, which will take some time," the designer warned. "How much time do you need?" Hannah interrupted. "I think about a month." "I'll give you 2 weeks. Everything should be ready by then." "Understood," the designer replied,
though his voice lacked confidence. 2 weeks later, Arthur journeyed to the town in the mountains to pick up Taylor. Waiting at home, Hannah was restless with worry. What if they didn't get along? When Arthur called from the airport to confirm their flight had landed and they were on their way home, Hannah stepped into the garden. It was festively adorned with balloons and lanterns. A large red battery-powered Jeep and a tricycle stood proudly on the lawn. "Do you think Taylor will like it, Erin?" Hannah asked the young girl. "Don't worry, Mrs. Lewis. You and Mr. Lewis will be the best parents in the world. Don't even worry." The wait for her husband and Taylor's arrival seemed interminable. At last, Arthur's car pulled into the courtyard. Hannah approached her husband and the boy, who Arthur was leading by the hand. "Hello, Taylor, do you remember me?" Hannah asked. "Yes," replied the boy, nodding his head. "You're my good one." The woman hugged the child, tears welling in her eyes. In that moment, she felt like she was embracing her happiness, and she was prepared to do everything to ensure that Taylor had a childhood filled with wonderful memories. The boy integrated into the family with surprising ease. He was never whimsical, always curious, and gladly participated in all the activities the adults were involved in. He would often be with Erin in the kitchen, where she would make him delicious pancakes, shape dumplings, and bake apple pies. In the garden, Taylor included the guard and the gardener in his games. He would daringly drive his Jeep along the paths, chasing the flying butterflies. In the winter, a skating rink was set up on the lawn for Taylor. Arthur and Hannah taught the boy to skate, and afterward they would all enjoy hot tea with delicious almond cookies together. The couple was happy. They had found what was missing in their lives. When Taylor called Arthur Daddy, the man couldn't hide his tears of joy. He scooped the boy into his arms, ran around the garden, and kept asking Taylor to call him Daddy again. 3 years later, the family celebrated Taylor's 5th birthday. They invited children from their friends' and partners' families for a joyful picnic in the garden, decorated with balloons. Clowns entertained the children, while a pile of colourful gift boxes grew on the terrace with each new arrival. Taylor was overjoyed, and Hannah and Arthur graciously welcomed guests who continuously complimented their wonderful son. Waiters served champagne and appetizers, and fireworks lit up the sky above the Lewis's garden at the end of the celebration, much to the delight of the young guests. After the party, Arthur put Taylor to bed himself. Before sleeping, Taylor made his father promise to help him unpack the presents the next day. After tucking his son in, Arthur went downstairs to the living room, where Hannah was sitting, rubbing her temples. "Are you not feeling well, dear?" Arthur asked. "I have a headache and feel dizzy," Hannah replied. "I probably drank more champagne than I should have. I guess I was just too excited." "Are you sure?" "I'm going to take a pill and go to bed. I'll be fine in the morning. Let's go to the bedroom." However, Hannah didn't feel better in the morning. Arthur put all his business aside and took his wife to the hospital. It was a day he would remember for the rest of his life. The family doctor approached Arthur with a mysterious expression. "What's wrong with her?" asked Arthur. "Is she ill?" "Not at all," smiled the doctor. "She's perfectly healthy. Just a bit pregnant." Arthur didn't immediately grasp the doctor's words. He looked at the doctor as if he were a ghost that had appeared in the middle of the night trying to confuse him. "Just a bit what?" Arthur asked. "Mr. Lewis, your wife is 5 or 6 weeks pregnant, but we need to conduct a more thorough examination." When Hannah came out of the office, she walked up to her husband and looked carefully into his eyes. "Dear, God has rewarded us for giving happiness and a family to Taylor. Now he will have a little brother or sister." 8 months later, the Lewises welcomed a daughter whom they named Piper. Meanwhile, despite marrying Paul, Sarah had no happy expectations. She did not love him, He just wasn't disgusting to her. Paul was reasonably good-looking, owned a small business, a small clothes shop, and had a small apartment. Sarah was tired of her father's daily drunkenness, his nonsensical talk, constant swearing, and the lack of peace. She yearned for a new, calm life and independence. Paul was a regular customer at the supermarket where Sarah worked. He was immediately drawn to the new cashier. He attempted to gain her attention and often complimented her. One day he invited her for a walk after work, and surprisingly, she agreed. Throughout their walk, Paul maintained an animated conversation, while Sarah mostly listened, offering brief responses. They began to see each other occasionally, mostly when Paul could escort Sarah home after work. One day, Paul said to Sarah, as they were saying goodbyes at the entrance, "It's easy for me with you. Shall we live together?" "Together? Like brother or sister? As neighbours? Or maybe as husband and wife?" Sarah asked sarcastically. "Which option do you prefer?" "Why would you say that?" "You know what I mean," Paul responded, somewhat offended that his words weren't taken seriously. "Come on, don't take offence," Sarah said. Soon after that they appeared before the girl's parents, and a month later they tied the knot. Living with Paul initially brought Sarah joy. They had fun together, always going out, visiting the movies and enjoying time in nature. Soon, Sarah left her job in the supermarket to work in Paul's shop. Why pay a salesman when you can sell clothes yourself? All the money goes into the house, Paul persuaded. Sarah gave in to his entreaties, but she regretted it the following winter. The harsh frosts forced her to pile on clothes and wrap herself in shawls to prevent freezing while standing all day in a poorly heated standalone store. "Wait a bit, we'll save up some money and rent a space in a shopping centre," Paul persuaded her. However, Sarah felt as if winter would never end, and they would never save enough money. "Here, have a drink to keep warm." A neighbour who sold women's underwear in the next shop once offered her a flask with heavy drink. "Take a sip. You'll feel warm all over right away." Soon Sarah started carrying the same flask to work. One day after work she found her husband Paul in the kitchen with only a bottle of whiskey and a glass on the table. The man looked at her with a blurry gaze and slammed his fist on the table, making Sarah jump in surprise. "You were lying, vile wench." Paul rose from the chair, his expression menacing and furious. "Paul, I don't understand. Why are you speaking with me like that?" Sarah backed away. "You've been deceiving me all along," the husband sputtered. "I thought you were a modest, quiet, normal woman, but you've been gallivanting with men since school. And not just that. You have been carrying a baby from who knows who." A stinging slap jarred Sarah back to reality. She clutched her burning cheek, looking fearfully at her husband. Fear gave way to resentment, which manifested in tears. Sarah locked herself in the bathroom and cried for an hour. When she emerged, her husband was asleep at the kitchen table, his head resting on his hands. After that incident, Sarah's family life began to deteriorate. Influenced by gossip from acquaintances and neighbours, Paul started treating her poorly. Everyone who discovered who his wife was felt obligated to reveal the truth about Sarah to him. Rumours and gossip stoked the flames of Paul's anger and wounded his pride. His drinking started to increase. One evening, Sarah sat across from him at the table. "We need to have a serious talk," she stated in a calm but firm voice. "What happened in school should not affect our lives now. That chapter is closed, and the past is the past. If you're unhappy living with me, I'll leave." "Why didn't you tell me this yourself?" "What is there to tell? That I gave birth and the baby died in the hospital? Did you really need to know that? What difference would it have made?
A big difference, Sarah, Paul shouted. It would have changed a lot. At least I wouldn't have looked like a fool to everyone else. Everyone knew everything, the whole town, and I was the only one left in the dark. Why have you done this to me?
I didn't think it would matter to you. I thought you married me, not the gossip you're hearing now. I won't apologize. I didn't do anything wrong. Life has just taught me a lesson. A single large tear streamed down Paul's cheek. Sarah felt sorry for her husband. She rose from the table, approached him from behind and hugged him. There was no serious quarrel that evening, but the couple's life went even more wrong. Little by little, Paul stopped doing his shop and replenishing the assortment, so the revenue was falling from month to month. After 5 years, he had to close the business altogether. For the subsequent year, after closing, Paul and Sarah were almost constantly inebriated. Occasionally, Paul's friends, fellow alcoholics, would come over, start fights and cause a ruckus, much to the neighbours' annoyance. Over time, the couple drank away their savings and sold off their belongings for a pittance, all searching for their next drink. In moments of clarity, Sarah realised she needed to change her lifestyle. At such time, she got out her guests and tidied up her home. Her mind urged her, stop drinking, wise up, change your life. However, her husband's hangover demands used to lead her back to old habits. It was a never-ending cycle. This cycle might have continued indefinitely if it were not for an incident that entirely changed Sarah's life. One day she was returning from the store with a bottle in her bag. Her husband was waiting at home, but she didn't want to go back. Instead, she sat on a bench in a public garden, watching yellow leaves gently fall from the trees. It was a beautiful autumn day, the kind poets often write about. Sarah thought that it was a mistake to leave the supermarket, a mistake to go to work at Paul's shop, a mistake to marry Paul at all. Suddenly, a dignified man in a grey raincoat approached her.
"Autumn is no time to be sad,"
he said, speaking to either Sarah or himself. It wasn't clear. The woman turned to look at him. The man had a kind face with bright eyes, crinkled at the corners, appearing about 20 years older than her. "Maybe," she responded, "but there are many other reasons."
"Many?" he smiled.
"Many." For some reason she felt a desire to talk to this man, to have someone empathise with her. It was as if he sensed it.
"Ben."
He extended his hand towards her. "Sarah," she responded, his warm handshake causing a stir in her soul, a sense of apprehension she couldn't understand. "You know, Sarah, when my wife passed away, leaving my daughters and me alone, and I sought comfort in what's now in your bag," he said, and acknowledging her surprised expression, added, "Yes, don't be shocked. I saw you at the store." The woman shifted on the bench, feeling embarrassed, being accused of drinking. She had always tried to hide her alcohol consumption from neighbours and acquaintances. Yet this man had easily identified her weakness. "My girls were just 5 and 3 years old," Ben continued. "They really suffered because their mother was no longer there. I wallowed in self-pity. When I realised that I could lose my daughters and end up alone, I realised that alcohol was not the solution. You have to live for those who love and depend on you." "I have no one to live for," Sarah replied. "No one loves me or relies on me." She sighed, lowering her head. If her baby was still alive, she'd have a reason to live. But now, what was there? A husband who couldn't control himself, who wanted nothing more than a bottle.
"You're wrong. You just can't see anything around you in your current state."
"What is there to see? A drunken husband? I know him like the back of my hand," Sarah responded.
"If you like, you can continue this way, but there are other options."
said Ben calmly. "You're a young, beautiful woman. Why let your life be ruined?" "I wouldn't call this a life," Sarah replied. "It's a mere existence." "And you don't drink at all anymore?" "Very rare," replied the man. "On holidays I always allow myself to drink with a good meal. I like barbecue. That's a pleasure. Nature in all its glory, fire, glowing coals and aromatic meat on them. How can you resist a small glass of wine?" "Yes," Sarah smiled. "It's been ages since I've been to a barbecue." "Do you want us to change this situation together?" Ben suggested. "Oh, really? Why?" Sarah asked uncomfortably, feeling as if she was imposing on this kind man. "Look at the weather. It's wonderful. I've already missed trips to the countryside. Trust me, you need it right now," he exclaimed. "Well, let's go," she replied uncertainly. "Great. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, meet me here." The man stood up and shook Sarah's hand. "See you tomorrow." Then he turned and left down the alley. For a while Sarah watched this remarkable man, realizing that nothing in life happens without a reason. If fate had unexpectedly brought him into her life, it was a sign. On her way home, Sarah found herself smiling without noticing. She hadn't felt this light and serene in a long time. She arrived home in high spirits. Even Paul, unkempt and inebriated, with his torn t-shirt and worn-out pants, couldn't dampen her mood. Placing a bottle in front of him, Sarah was about to leave the kitchen when he mumbled, "And you? Sit down, dear. Let's drink together." "No, thank you," Sarah replied firmly. She locked herself in the bathroom and stood under the shower for a long time. She felt as though the warm water was rejuvenating her, washing away any traces of past shocks from every skin cell. The next day, dressed in jeans and a jacket, she went to the park, where Ben was already waiting for her. 2 teenage girls were with him. "Meet Sarah. This is Megan and Claire, my daughters." Ben introduced his daughters. "Nice to meet you," Sarah replied. They went to the river and found a cosy spot. Ben set up a grill, pulled out a plastic bucket filled with marinated meat, bread, and vegetables from his backpack. "So, girls, I'll prepare the meat and you handle the rest, okay?" he asked, turning to Sarah and his daughters. "Got it, Daddy," replied the eldest, Claire. Sarah noticed that Ben's daughters were very efficient. They skillfully sliced cucumbers and tomatoes and arranged them on disposable plastic plates. "Do you and Daddy work together?" Megan asked. "No," Sarah replied. "We recently met." "Interesting," Claire said, scrutinizing her father's new acquaintance. "We thought you were a professor too." "Is your dad a professor?" "Of course, he teaches at the college. He teaches students," Megan said proudly. When the meat was ready, everyone sat down on the blanket that served as an improvised table. The picnic was a success. The girls were polite, though they didn't show much interest in Sarah, which made her feel better. Ben poured tea from a thermos and handed it to Sarah. "It's rosehip," said the man. "I make it myself. It's a very useful vitamin drink." "Thank you. You know, I feel so comfortable in your company," Sarah confessed, "as if I've known you for 100 years. "I'm overjoyed," Ben replied, smiling. Sarah returned home late when it was almost completely dark. "Where have you been? Did you bring any beer?" Paul asked grudgingly. "You go yourself, since you need it, and I'm going to bed." Sarah closed the door to the room. Her husband's grumbling could still be heard for a while, and then the front door slammed. The next day, Sarah went to the supermarket early in the morning where she used to work, and she was hired again. And a month later, on her way home, she saw Ben. "Hello, Sarah." "Hello," the woman smiled. "How did you end up here?" Actually, I'm waiting for you." "For me? Why?" Sarah wondered. "I want to talk to you,"
They walked down the alley in silence. Suddenly Ben stopped and began to talk. He mentioned that he was no longer young and said he didn't think there would ever be a woman in his life. He mentioned his daughters who need a woman's care. After a brief pause, he said, "Sarah, I've been offered a good position at the department in Regional City. They're providing a spacious apartment. Will you come with us?" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, confused. "Just go with me. I don't demand anything from you. Just be there for me. Be my friend, my companion for the rest of my life," the man pleaded, looking into her eyes with hope. "But—" Sarah began to object, but Ben silenced her with his hand. "Don't say anything. You have a week." He handed her a business card. "Here's my phone number. If you agree to my proposal, I'll be very pleased and happy. Now, let me walk you home. It's late and dark." They walked up to Sarah's place in silence. She didn't need words. She already knew she wanted to be near this mature, intelligent and wise man. A week later, she, with only one bag of belongings, left with Ben and his daughters for the regional city, leaving behind her drinking husband and a life of despair. At the Lewis mansion, a festive mood prevailed. It had been 23 years since Taylor joined the family. Throughout these years, the couple never once regretted adopting him. However, they decided not to reveal the secret of his birth. They loved him deeply, and their affection was reciprocated. For the boy, no one was more precious than his mum and dad, except his younger sister Piper. They were inseparable. When Piper was a baby, her older brother could spend hours with her. The 5-year age difference made him feel wise and authoritative. He always took his sister to the garden, read books to her, and even taught her how to build a snowman. And now Taylor was finishing his studies abroad and was due back home to spend the vacations. So Erin prepared a sumptuous lunch, including Taylor's favourite pie. When the car pulled into the yard, Piper rushed to greet her brother. "Taylor!" she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "I'm so glad you're here." "Quieten down, you wild thing," Taylor laughed. Following Piper, Hannah and Arthur also stepped onto the terrace. They were all in a happy mood. "How was your flight, son?" Arthur asked, embracing Taylor. "All good, Dad," Taylor replied. After hugging and kissing his mother, they all went inside the house. Once settled in the living room, the parents couldn't help but admire their son. "He's grown so much," Hannah exclaimed. "I can't believe that our little boy is all grown up." "What did you expect? Him to stay small, chasing a ball around the yard and sneaking candies from Erin in the kitchen?" Arthur joked. The family spent the entire day at home enjoying each other's companionship. Looking at how the grown-up children fooled around, Hannah was happy. Only the state of her husband's health marred her happiness. Hannah was awoken in the middle of the night by her husband's cries of pain. Arthur's aches had worsened, and he could no longer bear them. "Hush, darling, I'll get you a pill now," Hannah said, climbing out of bed. "No need, I've already taken one. It's not helping," her husband replied with laboured breaths. "What should I do?" Hannah picked up her cell phone from the nightstand and dialed for an ambulance. By the time the ambulance arrived at their mansion, the whole family was awake. Taylor and Piper were unaware of their father's illness. Their parents had skillfully hidden it from them to avoid causing them extra worries. Arthur was rushed to the hospital, his wife accompanying him. That night, no one in their home managed to sleep. Erin, dressed in a robe and a colourful shawl, brewed coffee for the youngsters. "Erin, did you know?" Taylor asked the housekeeper. "Did you know Father was ill?" "I knew, my dear boy, but I was strictly forbidden to speak about it." She placed cups filled with aromatic beverage in front of Piper and Taylor. "Let's keep our hopes up." "Piper, we need to go to the hospital," Taylor declared. "I'm going to shower, freshen up and then go there." "I'll come with you." Hannah sat in the hospital corridor, her gaze fixated on the blinking "Do not enter" sign.
Mum, how's Dad? Piper wrapped her arms around her mother, pulling her close. He's not good, sweetheart. But he's going to get better, right? They're going to help him, aren't they? I don't know, my dear. We can only have faith and hope. Mum, where's the doctor? I want to talk to him, Taylor said calmly. The woman dejectedly gestured towards the end of the corridor. The young man confidently walked towards the doctor's office. After knocking, he entered and found the doctor sitting at his desk. Hello, I'm Taylor Lewis, the son of your patient, Arthur Lewis. Have a seat, young man, the doctor suggested. The examination results just came in. Your father's condition is serious. It's quite advanced. Is there nothing that can be done? Taylor asked anxiously. We need a donor, but it's difficult to find one in such a short time. Who can be a donor? Theoretically, close relatives and people who are a match for the patient. Then let me be the donor. Taylor jumped up from his chair. I'm his son. I should match. Your eagerness is commendable, young man, but you need to be examined first. Of course, I'm ready, said Taylor, stepping into the corridor. He approached his mother and sister. Mum, Dad needs a donor. Blood relatives are most likely to be a match. I said I'm ready. Hannah looked at her son, her gaze clouded with grief, devoid of hope. No, son, it most likely won't work out. But why not? I want to help my father myself, don't I? Taylor exclaimed indignantly, puzzled by his mother's despair. I'm young, healthy. I'll recover quickly. For Dad, it's a matter of life and death. Stop and listen to me, his mother commanded in a firm voice, wiping her tears with a handkerchief. You can't be a donor for your father. You are not his blood relative. Taylor froze, as if doused with a bucket of cold water. It was beyond his wildest nightmares to hear such words from his mother. Then she added, You're not our biological child. You're adopted. What are you saying, Mum? Piper asked, frightened. Are you not well? Should we call a doctor? It's true. At home, I'll tell you all about it. Apparently it's time, she said bitterly. Sitting silently in the chair, she rocked side to side, lost in her thoughts. Meanwhile, Taylor slowly meandered down the corridor, eager to escape to the open air. His head spun from the life-altering words he had just heard. People often say that a person can't suffer indefinitely. If God bestows trials, sufferings, and pains upon them, they'll be rewarded with happiness and well-being in due course. This was true for Sarah. She had endured much suffering, a perpetually inebriated father, a stillborn child she couldn't even bury, and a husband who nearly turned her into an alcoholic. But then fate gave her Ben, an adult, wise, educated, and intelligent man. He became the closest and most cherished person in her life. When she moved to the big city with him and his daughters, Sarah felt she'd finally escaped her previously hopeless existence of misery and disappointment. They moved into a spacious 3-bedroom apartment. Ben continued teaching at the university, while Sarah took care of the household. After 5 years of living together, they got married. The girls warmed to Sarah too. They happily helped her with meals and accompanied her on shopping trips. Sarah ensured they were always neat and tidy and kept their school uniforms in order every weekend. She was their confidant, the first to know all their secrets. Sarah was the first one whom Claire told that she was in love and was going to get married, and during the wedding she thanked her stepmother in front of everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for being with us all these years. Sarah and Ben shared more than 20 years together, which were the best years of Sarah's challenging life. Ben, long overdue for retirement, couldn't imagine a life without his students and continued to teach. How can I stay at home and not work? I'll go crazy, become an old man like those sitting on the sofas and condemning everything in the world. Sarah suggested he find a hobby and rest more, considering his increasing heart issues and high blood pressure. However, the dedicated to the work man
insisted that his students made him feel alive and needed. Ben passed away at work from a heart attack during a lecture. His daughters Claire and Megan arrived the same day to arrange the funeral. After the wake, they discussed their plans for their father's apartment where Sarah lived. Claire asked, "What are we going to do about the apartment?" Megan suggested renting it out until they could inherit it, given its high value as a 3-bedroom apartment in the city centre. Claire reminded her that Sarah lived there, but Megan replied, "Father once sheltered her, but he's gone now. She should go back to where she came from." And Claire agreed with her sister. The next day they packed Sarah's belongings in a bag and told her, "You don't live here anymore," as they showed her the door. "Girls, where am I going to go?" the woman asked, confused. "That's none of our business," Megan retorted, slamming the door in the face of the woman who had once replaced her and her sister's mother. Sarah navigated the bustling streets of a large city, a sizable bag of belongings in her hand and a few bills in her cloak pocket. Life was teeming all around her. People were rushing somewhere, cars were speeding at breakneck speed, and the soul of the woman, who had grown old and grey from grief, was empty. There was no life in her any more. Sarah purchased a potato pie and tea from a street vendor, then found a seat on a park bench to think. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there. Next to her on the bench still lay an untouched pie and a cold tea when night fell over the city. "I'm sorry, are you feeling ill?" Sarah heard a voice that seemed to come from above. "Wake up!" She raised her head to see a stranger holding a large dog on a leash. The woman sat down next to her. "What happened to you? Should I call an ambulance?" she inquired. At this, Sarah's pent-up sorrow burst forth in a flood of tears. She sobbed uncontrollably. The woman handed her a small bottle of water from her purse. Once Sarah had calmed down, the stranger introduced herself. "My name is Shawnette. It's late, you can't stay here. Let's go to my place." Shawnette helped Sarah up and she followed her without protest. Once again, God supported Sarah by sending her a saviour. Shawnette felt so much for the fate of the old woman that she could not let her go nowhere. She herself had been through a lot in her life. The woman had 4 children, and her husband died when the youngest was not yet a month old. "Stay with us. We have room. There's enough space for everyone," Shawnette offered the next morning. Initially, Sarah was resistant, but Shawnette persuaded her, arguing that she needed help with the children, and Sarah could assume the role of their grandmother. That's precisely what happened. Shawnette's 2 sons and 2 daughters proved to be bright and affectionate children. Within a week, they announced to their friends and neighbours that their grandmother had arrived. Soon, everyone in the big apartment building knew about Sarah, and everyone treated her politely. Thus, Sarah, who seemed destined for loneliness after Ben's death, one more time found a family in the form of Shawnette and her 4 children. And now she was awaiting Shawnette, who went downstairs to speak with strangers. "Who are you?" Shawnette asked the well-dressed young man standing by a huge black jeep, peering into the windows. "I'm looking for Sarah Reed," the young man replied. "Does she live here?" "Perhaps you could introduce yourself first and explain what this is about," Shawnette responded skeptically. "Of course, my name is Taylor Lewis. As far as I've been able to ascertain, Sarah Reed is likely my natural mother." Shawnette's eyebrows raised. "To my knowledge, Sarah has no children." "Let me meet her and speak with her. It's the only way we can uncover the truth." Shawnette eyed the man carefully. "Let's go," she said, heading towards the entrance. The 2 guards followed Taylor, but he stopped them. "Wait here, please." Sarah placed the kettle on the stove and sat at the table. 10 minutes later, Shawnette entered the kitchen, followed by the young man, whom Sarah had noticed at the bottom of the entryway when she looked out the window. "Sarah, I don't understand anything, but this man needs to talk to you," Shaunette said, looking confused. "I'll leave you two alone." "No, stay here, Shaunette." Shaunette sent the children, who were curiously watching the guest, into the room, closed the door, and invited Taylor to sit down. Then she sat down herself. The man remained silent, staring into Sarah's face. Sarah felt like she had seen this young man somewhere before. His face seemed familiar, but she couldn't recall from where. "Are you Sarah Reed?" Taylor finally asked. "Yes." "My name is Taylor Lewis. For many years I've been searching for my mother, who left me at the maternity hospital." Shaunette and Sarah exchanged surprised looks. How could they assist this man? After a brief silence, Taylor continued his story. "I never knew that I was adopted until my father was on his deathbed. It was then that my mother emotionally revealed that she and my father had adopted me when I was very young. At first, I was furious and even left home. Eventually, though, I calmed down and began searching for my birth mother. All I knew was the name of the town and that my 16-year-old mother had left me at the maternity hospital shortly after birth. I imagined countless times how I would find her and express my feelings towards mothers like her. But then I would mentally thank her for my existence. After all, I have a happy, prosperous life, the world's best parents, and a sister whom I deeply love. Unfortunately, all my searches turned up nothing. The trail went cold at the maternity hospital. There was a small fire, and the documents were lost. No one remembered me, except one young cleaner. At the moment of my birth, she was cleaning the hospital corridor, and she overheard a conversation between the doctor and the grandfather of a newborn premature boy. The grandfather demanded to sign a waiver. "I am a father. My daughter is a minor, so I have the right to decide for her," the man stated loudly. The cleaner was so profoundly affected by the father's decision that she remembered the incident for the rest of her life. She also told me that she heard that the young mother had been told her baby had died, but she saw herself that the boy was sent to the orphanage. That's when I realized my own mother didn't know I was alive, and I got the leads that led me to you. Taylor fell silent. He looked at Sarah, who listened to his story in silence, tears streaming down their cheeks. She could not believe that her father could commit such a cruel act. He was long gone, and there was no one to question. Sarah was filled with grief and joy as she realized her son was alive. She wanted to stand and embrace her son, but her body was frozen in place. Tears were also streaming down Taylor's face, and he struggled with a lump in his throat. Finally, he swallowed hard and confidently declared, "I've found you, Mum. Now we'll never part again."